Hello everyone, this is your Daily Dose of Foreigner. You might have heard there was a suspected terror attack here recently, again, where an Afghan migrant injured 7 people with a knife before being shot and stopped by police. This all happened very public, right in the middle of downtown Vetlanda, a highly typical small Swedish town. Thankfully, nobody was killed in the end, but several people had to be treated in the hospital due to life-threatening injuries. The perpetrator arrived here during the refugee crisis in 2016 as a so-called migrant child. He is now said to be 22 years old. In 2018, the Liberal Center Party, along with the Socialist Left Party, were key factors in voting through a so-called amnesty law, allowing thousands of men, many pretending to be children, to stay in Sweden so they can go to school. The knife attacker was an illiterate and went there to learn the alphabet. But when Swedish state media go to cover the attack, they simply write this: a guy in his 20s stabbed people, 7 were injured, and 3 treated for severe injuries. Wow, that really tells us something, doesn't it? I feel like I really know what's happening in this country. This attack wasn't done by some random Swede from the countryside. It's done by a person who came here during the migrant crisis as a migrant and barely knows a word of Swedish. Why is that so difficult to explain? Of course, with the increasing critique in social media, accusing journalists of acting communist, they end up updating their news coverage, and with time it becomes a bit more informative when you read the articles. But it really is like they want to try and see how little they can get away with every time. Also, nobody chose to mention the following information and carry it forward. It was disclosed by this citizen journalist. He interviewed people who were there, and one of the victims who said that the attacker yelled Allahu Akbar as he was stabbing him. But police were not aware of this, as they made no effort to find it out when interviewing the victim, and it actually took them 3 days to interview the victims to begin with. Quite typical given our current police crisis, and I will be making a longer in-depth video on that police crisis in a near future. So make sure you stay updated on my channel if you want to find out more about that, and make sure to click subscribe if you haven't, as YouTube really doesn't recommend my videos to people anymore. So yeah, check me out manually. And so returning to the Allahu Akbar comments, none of that was covered by our mainstream media. They didn't pick up this info and carry it on. Instead, they largely focused on writing sob stories about racism, bad, increasing, comments forced to be deleted on social media. No! So they'll write about that, but it's only in alternative media I can read about leftist women love-bombing the man who tried killing 7 people. Comments flowing, saying, "We need to understand this person. Of course what he did is terrible, but it's based in him feeling just horrible, and many of us empathize with his situation as well. He is just as big of a victim, but nobody cares about him. Sweden is a racist shit country." Okay, well, just pointing out that technically speaking he can't be as big of a victim since he's unstabbed. So, just throwing that out there. Really important to be correct with the words. I guess there really isn't much to comment here, as the insanity speaks for itself. Most of these comments were actually written by the Swedish migrant activist women I've made a few videos about prior. Videos that obviously don't exist on YouTube anymore, so I advise you to get into alt tech and check my backup accounts, where a lot of deleted exclusives can be found. Now, what's really noticeable here is the disgusting double standard. They made tons of articles focusing on hateful comments in social media, but yet none of Sweden's mainstream journalists considered these comments to be problematic as well. I guess it's because they'd be more likely to express the same fetish. This opinion piece literally just talks about how racism is bad. Totally a new thought, and something that's not a given, right? Because people are just so horrible and evil all the time. So you're very special for having this opinion. You're a very special person. You're so good. Here's journalists taking to Twitter to emphasize that Vetlanda has profited off of immigration. But this isn't true, as half of Swedish municipalities have forced to cut down on welfare, helping the handicapped, school funding and such, because of immigration. As money doesn't go on trees, and there's not enough for everyone, you kind of have to prioritize there, huh? State media wrote an article about how Vetlanda now is perceived as unsafe by its residents. The heavy implication here being that it's not at all unsafe, and it's highly appropriate to shove this in your face right after 7 people got stabbed. Major outlets are focusing on many hateful comments in social media, meaning people's reactions rather than the cause of the event. This is clearly in line with their ever-increasing agenda to make social media companies act more like publishers than platforms. State media does free articles about this Center Party chairman who also works with unaccompanied refugee children. You know, this is the guy whose party, even though many articles about age fraud and overrepresentation in crime, his party wanted them to stay here. So get the personal agenda there, huh? I believe the term here is conflict of interest. First, I made an article about how it's important to fight racism after this tragedy.
Finns i luften en oro. Hur ser man på oss nu? Buntas alla ihop utifrån att man hade samma nationalitet som förövaren?
And then an article is published about how this politician received threats and hate online due to the previously mentioned article not saying what pro-open borders political party he's affiliated with. Pretty convenient and typical of state media. Then another third article about how racism is bad and negative comments on social media, because that needed to be repeated. Also, this gem right here, he straight up asked, to what degree do you understand that attacks like this raise critical reactions towards immigration? He responds, none. Seriously? Because I can, and I'm the migrant here. I came to Sweden as a war refugee, and I can fully understand people's skepticism, because when you flee a country due to destabilization, you kind of don't take it for granted anymore. You start to understand that concern is something that should be taken seriously. And in fact, I even see your liberalism as an outright threat towards refugees and immigration as an idea, because your kind don't really seem able to differentiate between the grateful and the oppressive. You believe in equality so much that you can't even distinguish perpetrator from victim. None of that helps immigrants and our reputation. I mean, political parties care very much about their reputation, right? And doing things correctly and appealing to the public. Well, immigrants work as a group too, in a sense. It's not like we all hang out, but we're aware of the fact that we're immigrants, and we're aware of social constructions, and we're aware of what happens when it develops a bad reputation. It kind of tends to make people irrational, you know? So, why are you allowed to care about reputation, but we're not allowed to have our reputation taken seriously? All you're doing here is making people think that immigration is a bad idea, period, in the long term. But you seriously have Swedish progressive prostitutes going out and calling anyone critical of our policies vultures capitalizing on a tragedy, despite the fact that people have legitimate reasons to object to a policy that creates situations like this time and time and time again for years, with study after study concluding that our policies just don't work. Not if you want to preserve the economy, preserve the welfare system, and keep women and children safe, that is. These are the very same people that will take a single event and use it to advocate gun control. But they won't push for immigration control, despite many more bad incidents. I mean, yikes, even the perpetrator himself blamed the Swedish model for this. Friends of his said he wanted to be sent home to Afghanistan and was highly upset that the welfare board didn't just give him a ticket home. This is the same motive pattern other notorious migrant killers have offered as well, including the Drottninggatan terrorist as well as the IKEA murderer. They were also put in this purgatory situation of having to wait for asylum for years, so long that you just kind of don't have a reason to be here anymore. It really is a devil's hand of kindness that Sweden extends when they promise everything to everyone. essentially promise you a free house and a blonde wife just for showing up here, and then they can't deliver anything other than an isolated ghetto, unemployment, and 2 years waiting before you get an asylum decision. Say what you want about repatriation, but it seems like sending more people back could have saved lives in many numerous cases, as well as saved people from developing traumas and mental disorders typical of crime victims. Human beings operate on expectations. Swedish politicians build so high expectations that they can't be separated from the rumors, the wild rumors that are spread by human smugglers, and then they expect people to come here and handle that disappointment with glee. There's even further scientific studies on this that we're gonna get into in just a few minutes. First, I'm gonna clarify something very important. Number one, this actually wasn't a terror attack. And number two, if you just look in the video description, you will find links on how to support my channel if you want to help keep this all going. I prefer Subscribestar and Patreon. Even the smallest donations add up big long-term, daddy. And if you donate there, you'll get access to my fantastic Discord server. Just a heads up, and don't forget to follow me on Odyssey and Rumble. But yeah, getting back to the video, this wasn't a terror attack. Police wrote that theory off after further investigation. They didn't really give any details to why they suspected it in the first place, but it could have been due to the religious remarks during stabbing. At which point, one might then wonder, why was the assailant yelling such a thing? Well, it turns out that a lot of stereotypes are simply true. Arabs will practically yell Allahu Akbar at anything, whether happy or sad, whether a son is born or a finger is burnt cooking. Applies to just about anything, so why wouldn't it apply to this? Apparently, it's not uncommon for Muslims to yell Allahu Akbar at a little bit of anything. You know, a culturally perceived wrongdoing, something that they feel is infuriating, dramatic. You end up in a car crash, you break a limb, your son comes home with shitty grades, your sister starts doing DP, you fall off while riding your bike, you know, anything chaotic or upsetting, including getting angry and stabbing someone in drug-induced anger. So it's really important not to be prejudiced, okay? Be open-minded. Stop being so narrow-minded. You know, you can't just assume that it's about terrorism. Assume that it's about their culture instead, and keep an open mind about things. But yeah, jokes aside, please don't demonetize me. Now you see leftists going, aha, not a terror attack. Just, 7 people stabbed in what's become kind of a common thing these days. But it's not a terror attack, and gun control works. Ha, see? But that's not really in your favor though, is it? I mean, if this was a terror attack, you could have argued it's just a rarity and only represents a very small, organized group of people. Very small. Just a rarity. But instead, it's a general gamble with open borders and immigration from certain countries, which is certainly worse. Now, this is just the same kind of typical insane crime you read about on a weekly basis nowadays here in Sweden, which is messed up enough on its own. It's not just the constant rape varieties. I recently read about a beheading attempt at a local kiosk down in southern Sweden that I've been to numerous times, and it's truly weird to read about a violent skirmish with 3 people. One guy takes out a knife and starts trying to saw someone's head off, and it's the exact same place that you bought peanuts before traveling to a live show in Malmö, where you got the chance to troll the leader of the feminist party in Sweden. So, yeah, it's very exciting to live in Sweden nowadays. It's kind of like if New York City was a country, only far less urine. This is the new normal. This is the typical imported crime that you wouldn't have read about just a mere 2 decades ago. And so that very fact alone is enough to make people think the very thought that the left is trying to avoid making them think. Namely, is Sweden doing things right? Well, if one of your priorities includes safety, comfort, and being able to raise children for the future, the answer is no. A loud, perverse, astounding no. Please don't imitate this. Take, for example, this guy. Stabbed 3 times in front of his son. This is one of the victims of the Afghan's knife attack, a refugee from Syria. So it's pretty obvious by this point how an overly generous migration policy ends up hurting migrants, often physically and directly. Another example is the increasing amount of gang shootings that have been moving out into the public sphere, claiming victims in drive-bys, which often have a migrant background themselves. Without any proper vetting and firm deportation policy with criminals, you're just allowing perpetrators to be treated like victims. Chief Prosecutor Per Lindqvist warned that Sweden's legislation is so much softer than any other EU country, there's a serious risk people will migrate here simply to avoid criminal prosecution in their home countries, coming to Sweden to carry on their personal pattern of victimizing others. This here is the toxic end station of liberalism and feminism, so fetishizing of social justice that they really, truly, sincerely want it for everyone, especially those that will take it from others. It really says a lot that this is the first official feminist government in human history. A huge study looking at data from 154 countries across a 40-year time span concluded that, yes, of course accepting refugees increases the risk of terrorism. The media has long tried claiming the opposite, presenting some half-baked expert as a source when actual bigger experts got actual data to rely on, not opinions. But come to think of it, did we even need a huge study like this? All you really need to figure out open borders don't work is try running a Discord server. Try being a moderator, try running a forum. You'll soon discover absolute and total freedom, in its most literal sense, is a horrible idea for a reason. But more notably, it's absolutely disgusting seeing every professional leftist claim that this attack had nothing to do with our migration policy, when this is the same people that tried blaming Trump and Parler for the Capitol Hill chaos just 2 months ago. And not only that, our very Prime Minister tried associating Capitol Hill to his conservative opposition here in Sweden, essentially saying, "They want to do the same thing, I just know it." So something happening at a protest in America is related to Sweden, but an attack in Sweden has nothing to do with Swedish policies. Great. Funny how logic always works out for the socialists there. Circa 30% of Sweden's population is now foreign, and about 2/3 of Sweden's Muslims vote for Löfven's party. The Social Democrats are also the very best at consistently handing out welfare to extreme religious associations connected to the Muslim Brotherhood, as well as other Islamist groups. They signed a contract with one organization to fill Swedish seats with Muslim politicians. They approved Saudi-funded mosque buildings all over Sweden. They refuse to prosecute returning ISIS fighters, as none have been convicted yet, despite there being legal room to do so. But nobody seems to want to take the perceived backlash of such a thing. If you look from Sweden's left to Sweden's right, they generally refuse to say anything critical about Islam or immigration. Because why would they trash talk the only people who are voting for them nowadays? Because they haven't been in a country long enough to learn that you can't trust their party. Of course, Social Democrats wouldn't want to blame their own policies on this attack, but the fact is that this one, and many others similar to it, including the entire man-made rape crisis Sweden is going through, are direct consequences of your feminist leftist policies. Your buzzwords, your ideals, your decisions. I've made many videos documenting this, but specifically relevant here is that 45 minutes documentary of what specific policies paved the literal way for the latest terror attack we had, and that system can really be applied to a lot of different crime categories. So yeah, expect similar things to happen again, many times over, because the Swedish motto is to get really rustled in your jimmies, get really upset and angry about this, and then go and vote for the exact same people that made it happen to begin with. Since distrusting authority is considered embarrassing here. And oh golly gosh, you clearly don't want that. I mean, that's totally worth more than, say, human lives.